But yeah, let's talk about this. The X Summit. It's happened now. What, 3 days ago? 2 or 3 days ago. My schedule just didn't allow for me doing it anywhere near the time that it was released. So another apology there. So yeah, I apologize for the delay in getting this up. A combination of real life time constraints and wanting to really absorb the announcement before rushing this out made it basically impossible to post the day of the GFX 102 announcement at the X Summit in Stockholm, Sweden. The audio issues gave me time to let this breathe. Seriously, it's needed. So I was actually, though, however, listening to the X Summit live while I was shooting time lapses in Yokohama, and I was using my 100S, which I'm actually filming with right now, by the way. And I think doing that actually was a really good and kind of weird way to literally listen to the details of the new camera while using a camera that is very similar to both the 100 and the new Mach 2 version. For me, doing time lapse in general is often a sort of meditative state. So learning about this new camera while physically using the 100S in such a relaxing manner, I could actually sort of feel the new camera in my hand without actually having it, and also really absorb what was being said, as I wasn't really rushing to do anything at that time. I was really just absorbed in this beautiful landscape or cityscape, really. But then the next day, my work actually brought me to a section of the Tama River, which I rarely make it to lately. But it's kind of one of my favorite spots to go and just kind of blow off steam and shoot away with the GFX 100S, and I did it with my Nikon too. The birds are usually far away there at the river, which is a bit too far, honestly, especially for the 250mm GF lens, even though I was using the 1.4 times teleconverter. But that's why I like going there. It's something where, a lot of times you're trying to get that ultimate bird shot, get the ultimate detail. But when I go there, I'm really just shooting for the pleasure of shooting. And it's not just about the birds. It's about letting the light play on the river and the landscape surrounding it while the birds do their thing. And again, I really felt myself, though, drawing many real-world comparisons to what I'd listened to the night before about the new GFX camera and the lenses as well, but particularly the camera. And with birding, this time I was able to really think about it in a different way. I often do like landscape portraits, time lapse, night skies. I do astro. I do long exposures. I really am somebody who has to always be rotating what I'm doing with photography. It keeps me learning and fresh, and it's just the way I am. And that's really, if it seems like I'm rambling, I'm really trying to drive the point here that I am an all-around cameraman. I know everyone says stick with one thing, but that doesn't work for me. I could never do that. I'm too ADHD to do that. But for this last year, I've had the GFX 100S in my hand or in my backpack as I travel around Japan more of my waking hours than not. And by the way, I'm stumbling over my words. I'm just gonna go, otherwise this will never get done. I don't want to edit. But I think really the truth is that makes me one of the more qualified real-world photographers out there. I'm sure that I'm not the best photographer, nor am I, a Hollywood or highly polished, is what I'm trying to say, YouTube channel getting sponsorship. So, cameras aren't handed over to me for testing before the release. So no, I don't have the GFX 102 in hand, but I think that's actually, it's kind of likely going to make this a more useful talk for a lot of people, because though I don't have the 102, I know the GFX very well, and even without that camera, I can safely say I know it a lot better than a lot of the big names who got early copies. Not all of them, but a lot of them. Pinot Noir. If it's not Pinot Noir, you're quite far. So yeah, but I'm not going to be going over every feature here announced, but I am going to do my best to really go over the specs and improvements, which I think are relevant for most people in the real world. And I'll give you a little bit of insight whenever I can into, kind of why I find or feel those are important features. Let's start out though with some basic information. The new GFX 102 has a 102 megapixel CMOS 2 HS or high speed sensor, which according to Fujifilm has 2 times faster readout, and the camera has 2 times faster buffer thanks to a memory increase to 128 gigabytes versus the previous 64 gigabytes. So this is said to give faster, more reliable autofocus and allows for up to 8 frames per second unlimited burst mode in photo. And the camera is using the new X Processor 5, which is the same as the XT5, the XH2, and the XS20. The 100 and the 100S use the X4 processor. So the stabilization has also been said to now be 8 stops of internal body image stabilization, which is now also using motion blur detection from the sensor in addition to that traditional gyro stabilization. So that should be interesting to see how that works. And I'm not sure if that's anything to do with AI. Initially I thought that, but maybe not. There might be some AI in that. There are so many video codecs and features in various modes. I'm not going to go into every option, but basically we have 4K up to 60 frames per second, we have 8K up to 30 frames per second, and 1080p up to 100 frames per second, each with various crop modes and codecs. You can freeze the video anytime if you want to look at them in detail, or just go to Fujifilm's website. And those will probably get updated with the next firmware, or there'll probably be some additions. There's some interesting stuff here though, and I would like to talk about that. We have 4K 60p in standard 16:9 and 17.9 DCI, 8K in 30p, which will include a pixel-to-pixel crop mode. Initially it sounded like that was the only 8K, but when I was looking at the various other crops, I'm not so sure about that now. There might be some other stuff going on. It's worth mentioning though, to that pixel-to-pixel crop, it's actually something closer to APS-C maybe than full frame, or perhaps right between the two. But that's not necessarily a bad thing, since you're getting some significant reach increase there. And in a lot of the video modes, I think that's also true. You'll need to choose lenses accordingly as your frame is going to change significantly depending on which mode you're using, or move your feet around, but sometimes that's not an option. Anamorphic is in there, yes, it is, and that's a very nice addition, including the various crop modes for the most part. Since, as I said, it just allows more versatility in how we shoot. Sometimes we can't really get closer, so it lets us punch in. Sadly, what I want most though in video, which is an X-Pan pixel-to-pixel video mode, is basically absent, but we seemingly have something perhaps similar in one of the two anamorphic modes. One of the two anamorphic 8K modes is actually a 8192 by 2968 aspect ratio. X-Pan is 65:24 crop in the GFX 100S for photo, and that's 11648 by 3404. So this would have been the truly unlocked option, but maybe the X Processor 5 with double speed is still just not up to the task, as that's basically two 8K images side by side. So maybe we'll have to wait a few more years for a camera that's actually able to really take advantage of the resolution there and use that full sensor width. Anyone trying to do the math, 8192 by 2968 is really close to the 65 by 24 crop. It's just a little short on the wide end. I'm really curious though, is this really indeed a processor limitation, or is it Fuji's way of ensuring that people avoid vignetting when they're using full frame anamorphic lenses, as there's really very few options that will cover fully the GFX sensor without some vignetting, or maybe also just to keep people out of the soft edge territory as well, which anamorphic lenses are kind of famous for in general. It would actually make a lot of sense and be in line with my theory of why Fuji doesn't allow for in-camera time-lapse video, at least on the GFX cameras. You basically can only do photos and then have to take them in to your NLE and do it that way. And I think it's because they want to try to keep people posting the highest quality time lapses possible. When you use video, you're just not getting that same resolution or quality or color that you're going to get out of photos. There is one other thing really missing though, and that would be a slow motion X-Pan video mode, even at lower resolution, even 1080p. This is a must, in my opinion. Full HD 96 frames per second would be awesome, but at least 80 frames per second, or at the very least 60, but really 80-ish. Now, Fujifilm, before saying it's impossible or maybe difficult, or not needed, just imagine it, okay? Close your eyes, Fujifilm engineers and management, and see it. The streets of Tokyo, rain on the street, people with umbrellas waiting for a train. An old woman had her umbrella soaking wet and just opens it as rain pops off the top, and here comes the train, spitting mist from the tracks as someone shakes rain from up top their umbrella. And scene. All right. Lastly, regarding X-Pan, I would like to see a non-anamorphic option as well in this ratio, and maybe that's actually what we have, because I think that, yeah, we'll see. I'm not an anamorphic person, and I forget how that works actually. But bottom line is that we can't all afford anamorphic lenses at this time, and afford some of the great GF lenses as well. So it's simply something I think that you should offer so that we can all be a little bit cinematic. In regards to slow motion, there is 1080p, 120 frames per second. There's 4K 60 frames per second, as mentioned, with varying crops. And hopefully one, if not all, are much better than Fujifilm's previous attempts at slow motion. They weren't terrible, but especially in the GFX camera, it just doesn't look that great. With full sensor readout though, and the right amount of bits, I think it can do the job. But just remember, high bit rate doesn't always equate to higher quality video. I think it really needs to be full sensor readout and done properly, like Nikon's. Anyways. There is an impressive 700 megabits per second option in most of the video modes, which should be pretty nice. In addition to the above, video now has ProRes internal. There's an SSD hard drive recording over USB option, USB-C. Finally, though, that should have been 5 years ago, but it will allow for cheap, large storage to be used, which you can connect directly to your computer and work off. And it should also work with NVMEs, which have adapters that have USB on them, USB-C. So beyond video though, we have a new electronic viewfinder with faster readout in live view mode. The EVF has a new display and lenses, so it's just all around new, and it gives 1.0 times, I don't know why we don't just say one time magnification, and a very welcome 9.4 million or 9.44 million dots of resolution. It's said to be lagless, so that means that your subject and the image you actually see in the EVF are perfectly in sync, which makes subject tracking, especially with birds, especially with kingfisher, which I do a lot of, much easier than in cameras with significant lag. The EVF has both 60 frames per second in 1.0 times crop and 120 frames per second at a 0.77 times crop, which they're calling the high speed mode. So this is all very welcome news for me personally, but I would like to know how this EVF handles low light, because frankly the 100S, it's terrible, truly terrible, with so much noise, especially when you're shooting at night and doing things like trying to focus on stars. It's virtually impossible, even using really fast lenses. I will say I learned just after writing this all down that it is said to be, there's a blackout free mode at 5 frames per second when you're shooting, so that's really good to know. Also, I'd like to verify though, is the 9.44 million dots standard? Because currently there is a resolution boost mode in my 100S which affects the EVF. So basically I'm asking, is it a constant 9.44 million or megapixel resolution, or is it mode dependent, like with the 120 frames per second versus the 60 frames per second, or something else in there that we should know about? Now, another big one for me though in regards to improvements is ergonomics. The GFX, though fine for short works, the 100S anyways, with medium weight lenses, really does not hold up for all day handheld shooting, particularly for nature and sports scenarios. And I'm happy to see that there are some improvements here. But I do want to say the big question is whether they are meaningful, real world improvements. Oh, hi. The camera looks so similar to the current 100S and 100 at its base ergonomics that I'm skeptical, wondering if the improvements are only thought out on a short-term use cases. The bottom line is we will not know until we or others we trust have a chance to test this in more extreme, long-term scenarios. As it's really not just about holding a camera all day, but doing multiple all-day sessions in real-world situations. In my world and the world of many of my peers that roam the vast nature of Japan, that's basically the norm, and fatigue over days and even weeks and even months adds up. So similarly, I cannot talk today. I'm hesitant to praise what is said to be a more durable finish. I'm more inclined to believe they got it right, as they did in fact address the top area, which is more prone to scratching. But I will say I looked at Gordon Lang's video and I noticed what looked like two little scratches right up at the top front of the camera. But bottom line is we need to get the cameras in hand and really see in the real world how they are. A lot of these reviewers that get the cameras before the release, they get them only for a week or two, or at the best a month, and it's really hard to get a full-on user experience impression from that. Anyone that shoots a lot can tell you the first impressions are fleeting. I mean, day in and day out use for months is the only way. I know I'm harping on this, but it's really the only way to truly know if a camera is right for you. It's great to get the info on specs, as they do matter, and for a lot of people that don't shoot day in and day out, it's not so important. But for me and a lot of others I know, ergonomics, ease of use, and ruggedness can take time for evaluation, but also make and break a camera. Button layouts is another thing that's important, but that's very personal, so I'll only comment on one thing I noticed, and that is the second function button for your fingers on the grip. So that's great. It really is. This is a good thing, and I think it may reduce the times that I accidentally press the lens release, as that does happen. And I'd like to know, am I alone in that? Because I came from a Nikon Z6 which had two function buttons there, and yeah, it's just right where that second function button would be basically. So if you're focusing, especially a manual focus lens, and push that button while you're turning the wrong direction, it's potential for release. I've never dropped a lens, but I partially released them. So yeah, I think having two will now kind of be a better way just to know that's not it, because most cameras very rarely do they have three function buttons. Regarding the vertical grip, which is available as an accessory, I've already voiced my praise in forums about this. It allows for people to pack things down smaller during excursions, and me backpacking everywhere, that's very important. I'm very happy to see the grip has the same dual button layout as the camera body, as that's not always the case when camera companies release a grip. There's also an optional cooling fan said to double the time in hot weather, and at 25 Celsius or lower it's said to make no limit for video recording, but that's based on 4K 60p, and obviously it's limited to the batteries unless you're doing external via USB or a DC adapter. But that being said, the grip allows for two batteries and there's one in the body, so you should be able to hot swap the batteries in the grip while keeping the camera going. For me personally though, that fan, it may be useful for long exposure and time lapse, particularly in the summer here in Japan, when the 100S has shown me a lot more hot pixels, which is something the camera is already prone to in the best of conditions, even in the winter, especially doing long exposures. But I will say carrying that fan around and attaching and reattaching seems kind of a hassle, but it's probably something that I would invest in for those scenarios. But I would really much rather have seen a slightly larger body, deeper anyways, with an integrated cooling system. The little Sigma FP camera, Both of them have integrated fans, so it's really hard for me to imagine why it can't be done here on this relatively massive GFX body. You can say it's not massive. Look at it compared to Fujifilm. Look at it compared to an FP. You'll know what I'm talking about. So I really would like to know Fujifilm's logic here, why they don't just put the fan inside the camera. Something I can wholeheartedly praise here, though, is the removable EVF with the optical tilting and rotating accessory. It's something from the original 100 and the 50S, which I greatly wish was on the 100S. Honestly, that was the thing that almost had me buy a 50S, because I was like, oh, that is so... I got how useful that is as a photographer, you know, being able to frame in tight, difficult situations or just looking down. Anyways, briefly, though, I want to keep moving because this is going to be really long, but regarding the ports, there's Ethernet now, there's headphone and mic on the opposite sides of the body, there's full-size HDMI, which is awesome. The headphones on opposite sides sound smart at a glance and will be easier to remember which is which, but I can envision situations where it might be more convenient having everything run out one side of the camera, which is what I'm doing right now. But I can also see where the opposite would be useful, so I think it's a use-by-use thing there, and I think mostly it's going to be a non-issue for most people. RAW is still external via the HDMI, which is now full size versus the previous, as I mentioned. Used to be, I think, micro HDMI is what they call it, the really tiny one, which is really not fun. That's what I'm using right now. It gets bent really easily. It's just wonky. But I'm really confused as to why they couldn't do RAW over USB-C to the external SSDs. I believe, again, the Sigma FPs do that. Correct me if I'm wrong. That camera, though, is nearly 5 years old. I mean, Sigma FP and the FPL are way underrated cameras. I know their weaknesses, but their strengths are amazing, especially for their size. The new camera does indeed have one SD slot and one CF Express. I would be pretty disappointed here if it wasn't for the SSD recording, as I think it's really high time to switch to CF Express all the way around for high-end cameras. I learned to love the format's robust build and reliability on my Z6. I actually bought two V60 SD cards from Team Group, which are really nice and faster than most V60 cards. But even in low bitrate video and just recording regular or just doing regular photo shooting, I occasionally do see freezes and other weird issues on the 100S. I'm certain a CF Express card, even the slower ones, would not have such issues. And by having one SD, I think it's just keeping that door open for issues to happen. Let's really face it here. A lot of new users, especially people stepping up from lower cameras, are likely to try the camera with whatever SD cards they have lying around. I mean, I know I definitely tried some other ones as I first purchased the GFX 100S just to see if they worked. Most of them do, but with issues. So I think many are going to be, you know, some of them are going to have really big issues, and taking away the option with dual CF Express cards would really amount to a better user experience out of the box for all people, in my opinion. And I think you can probably mark my words on this, is you're going to see a lot of YouTube videos shortly after the release of the GFX 102 talking about freezing cameras and various issues, which will fail to mention that they're using V30 or even V10 or even really some of the older, slower SD cards of 5-10 years ago. So I think it's just Fujifilm probably would have done themselves a service not to have SD be an option on this new camera. So lastly, in regards to the camera, there is a new film simulation which is based off of Fujifilm's Reala film called Reala Ace, and it's based around the concept of comfortable images to the human eye that have a natural look. And it sounds very much like a look that I often strive to achieve with my edits in Darktable. I probably tend to do a little bit more high contrast than what they're talking about, but I'm really looking forward to using it, hoping that maybe it's a step closer out of camera to the looks that I'm trying to achieve. Now, a lot of people want to know if that's going to trickle down to other cameras. Officially, they said the Fujifilm 102 will be the first camera to have this simulation. They didn't say others will have it, but I think they kind of left the door open there. So yeah, we'll see. They did emphasize that 100 megapixel sensor allowed for the subtlety needed to make the simulation shine. So perhaps we will be limited to having that simulation officially only available on the 100 megapixel cameras. But I'm sure others will simulate the look, probably selling them as the, what do you call them, the recipes or something like that, and make it available for free or purchase. And I'm not making fun of them. Actually, it's something that I'm considering doing myself. If you're a Darktable user like me, you'll probably see it eventually in Darktable itself. But I've been thinking for a while about making my own attempts to make basically Darktable versions of some of these looks that you can buy, and maybe offer them for sale for obviously good, easy to afford values. I'd be interested in hearing if any people in the Darktable universe are watching this, if they would be happy to see something like that. Because I feel that I've created some pretty amazing looks using the GFX camera over the last year. So let's talk really quickly about the lenses announced. I'm really not going to go into details at this time about each lens, as this video is long enough already. But all of these lenses should be pretty much optically stellar, as they are all in the pro-oriented category. And even the more low end, if you can call them that, or budget, if you can call them that, oriented GF lenses are quite good compared to other systems. There's a 50 millimeter 1.7 lens, which people have been waiting for, and then there's the two tilt shift lenses, which people have been waiting for. One of the tilt shifts is a 30 millimeter f5.6, and the other is a 110 5.6 macro. All three of these lenses have been on everyone's radar. If you follow Fujifilm forums, a lot of people have been whining and complaining about not having them yet. They technically they released them within the year they said they would, just right at the end, but that's fine for me personally. And I personally would love to have all three, but the 55 millimeter probably makes the most sense for me personally. Though I will say I did notice that it's not a linear motor lens, but I think that this is a lens that a lot of people could seriously consider as, it's ideal for obviously street and portraits, but realistically a lens like that at a 44 millimeter equivalent, 1.3-ish, but keep in mind that's the focal length. It doesn't increase the light. But for astro, nightscape, and anything at night, but also just general purpose photography and even video, it's a very useful focal length and amount of light getting in there. Even at 1.7, it's on par with the 80 millimeter 1.7. The 110 f2 really is the only thing in that range from native mount Fuji lenses at this moment. So it allows you to shoot, with plenty of light at relatively low ISOs, and yeah. Interesting, I think Fujifilm is actually eavesdropping on my brainwaves, though, as I was just imagining how motors could use bearings to improve their smoothness. Now, I was envisioning it on linear motors, rods, but being a DC motor, it seems like they're doing something a little bit different here. But yeah, maybe Fujifilm, if you want to hire me as a theoretical engineer, I have a lot more ideas like that. I'm freelance, we can talk. But really, this should be something of a nice lens, and I think with those bearings, we might be getting over some of those stepping motor, DC motor type hurdles. This might be on par with linear focus. So we'll have to kind of see, and that might be the final thing that makes me decide whether or not to get this lens or not. But either way, I think that's a really big step forward for DC motor lenses, and maybe it might bring down the cost of lenses in general, as they tend to be lesser cost lenses, and just throwing a couple bearings in there probably doesn't cost much. So there's also a possibility for them revising other already released GFX lenses that are non-linear motor in the future using this system, or my patented bearings on rail linear focus lenses. Maybe they can use those as well after they pay me. But yeah, so it could very well be, though, these lenses start allowing for some super smooth focus pulls compared to past lenses, maybe even compared to linear lenses. We'll see how this will be really interesting, I think, to see. And Fujifilm also did announce a cinema power zoom lens that they said very little about, but they did say that it's going to be electronic, all electronic control, including power zoom, basically. I probably just put it in my own head because, again, I'm always thinking things. I would like to think I'm thinking ahead, but maybe that could be something that has its own follow focus type settings within the lens and zoom points within the lens. They said it's going to be much easier for cinema, so we'll see. That'd be really interesting to see how that comes, and we're going to have to wait, I think, for till 2024 for that lens, and also a 500 millimeter 5.6 lens, which is on the roadmap, which is huge for many of us in wildlife and sports photographers. Honestly, I've been so very close to jumping back into the Nikon system lately, and that's the biggest reason. Lack of long lenses. It's something I need, longer lenses to do a lot of the bird photography that I love, especially when we're talking about kingfisher. Since that lens will obviously allow for the 1.4 times teleconverter, as with the 250 and the 120 or to 200 millimeter lens, it'll become a 700 millimeter 7.8 lens, which is roughly 550 millimeter f6 full frame equivalent, which is definitely useful for a lot of birders and wildlife photographers. It won't be the longest lens, but it's long enough for a lot of scenarios. I'm really hopeful that they're holding back on a 2 times teleconverter announcement, and maybe that'll come with that lens, as that would truly open up the system and just make sense not only for the new roadmap lens, the new lens on the roadmap, but the current 2 GFX lenses, which accept teleconverters, as I mentioned. From the silhouette of this future lens, a few things are interesting. Firstly, it looks like it does have an Arca Swiss type mount. Yay, that's a good thing. It just saves us the need to, put our own on there. It's nice. And they're also, if it's to scale, they're showing it next to the 250 millimeter lens. It looks like, well, I'll say first, it has a significant height increase on that handle, which is great, because if you've seen my 250 millimeter GF lens video, you'll see why I hate that handle. That some people say is not a handle. It's a handle, but it's not a very good one. It's just too small. But also, if those silhouettes are to scale, it looks like the lens is not that much bigger than the 250 millimeter lens, leading me to believe that this is something that they took a cue from Nikon, and this may very well be a Fresnel element lens. I think it's really, really highly likely, and it makes sense, because going forward with the GF system, if they want to keep focusing on this lighter, theme, part of their formula, if you watch their official video, you have to do that. That's the only way to keep the weight down for these longer lenses. And if Fujifilm plays their cards right, that also means this lens could be a very good value. The price does not have to be very high. You can look at some of Nikon's lenses with Fresnel elements to see what I'm talking about. I hope that they would keep the teleconverter external, as that tends to raise the prices to ridiculous levels. I've never understood why putting a teleconverter inside the lens has to raise the cost so much. So I would just say, please, Fujifilm, make it affordable, because frankly, most of us are on more of a budget than you realize that are in your system. Just because we can afford the cameras doesn't mean we can afford the lenses, especially a lot of bird photographers. We're doing this for the sheer love, and we'll adapt lenses if that's our only option. It's something I've done and I'll continue to do. Nikon lenses work really nicely on this system at telephoto lengths. But if the price is right, I know that it'll be a great lens to work with. And you'll get a good cross-section of nature photographers doing that into the GFX system, not just the prima donnas. Sorry guys, I don't know what else to call you. But, not just the ambassadors. And it will really let the lens shine through and the whole system shine through, because you're going to see so much great stuff from people that are really out there just loving the light and loving the landscapes and loving the birds and all the different wildlife. Yeah. But only if we can afford it. Give us that awesome sleeper lens that is relatively affordable first and foremost, and work on those with deep pockets in 2026, 2027. So basically that's it for now. Obviously there was a lot more announced, but I think that these are really the key points for a lot of everyday shooters, real shooters, people that don't necessarily need to know all about all the video specs, because honestly, if that's what you're interested in, you're going to be looking at other videos. If I do see some good videos with really good information, I'll try to link them below, because I don't need to gatekeep information here. I'll put it in the description if it has real merit, or link below. I try to avoid the marketing hype videos, and I suggest you do the same. I'm sure this is going to be a great camera, but anyone telling you that you got to get one, well, maybe they don't really have your best interest at heart. So perhaps you're wondering if I'll switch from my 100S to the 102. I don't have a 100% positive answer on that yet, but I'm leaning towards no. There's a couple reasons. Let me first say why I want it. Okay, I want it because the ergonomics are probably better. I want it because the autofocus is going to be somewhat better. The frames per second, a little bit better is nice, but really the ruggedness, I scratched up my GFX 100S. Not a whole bunch, but enough to bother me. And yeah, the battery grip, I mean, there's a lot of reasons, honestly. There's a lot of reasons why I like the camera and I would love to have it, but the value, it's expensive, bottom line, and I'm 100% sure that there will be something like a 100S Mark II coming in the near future, at least within a year or so. The reason being, Fujifilm already addressed the need for a sports camera, and this 102 is not a sports camera. It's the flagship replacement for the 100. Please note that. For people saying that the two cameras are merging together, no, they're not. They're still separate lines, and you'll continue to see other cameras coming forward with faster read speeds and faster autofocus. So as tempting as it is, I'm not going to jump on that boat. I might sell my 100S, but if I do, it's to go into something like Nikon system, or even Panasonic is looking interesting to me these days. But if you know the camera is right for you, then you know that, and honestly, I would suggest jumping on it because it is a great camera, and relatively speaking, it's a great deal. I will be posting affiliate links below. If you don't know, affiliate links means that it doesn't mean that I have any close ties to Adorama, but what it means is that I get a very small commission if you buy through their link at no extra cost to you. It's something that keeps content creators going and gives them a little bit extra encouragement that they're on the right track. I'd like to think that even though I stumble over my words, I'm giving some useful information here that others are not, and a perspective, a real-world perspective, that right now, when a lot of content creators that started out 5 years ago are really kind of grooved into where they're getting all the new cameras sent to them all the time, and I know some of them are unbiased, and a lot of them say they're unbiased, but you kind of notice that they rarely say anything. I don't want to use the word negative, but they tend to have a very positive spin on things, which yeah, be honest. So yeah, buying from my affiliate links really helps. You have to click on the link and buy through that link, though. Don't re-go to the page. It helps me and supports me and keeps me creating and letting me know that my content is appreciated. So I do have a lot of other stuff on the back burner, much more creative stuff. Honestly, this is the last thing I want to be doing right now, but it is a camera that's relevant to me, so that's why I'm talking about it. I've been working on some extended time exposure, or time lapses and long exposure stuff that I'm going to be putting together into something that I think will be a pleasure to watch. Not sure when that's coming, but it is coming, and I have some other stuff going in as well, and some collaborations coming. So keep an eye out for my stuff. I'm also going to be doing some contests in the very near future. I'm getting close to 500 subscribers. I know it's not many, but I'm going to push to get there soon. When that happens, I'll start some giveaways, probably some just cute little trinkets from Japan that are easy to send in the mail. But when I hit 1,000, I'm going to start giving away some of my prints. I do sell prints on my website, Film-Studio-Japan.com. Though that site is a little bit needs to be refreshed. You can still purchase through there, but I'm going to be working on it, upgrading it in the very near future. So I got through it. Pinot Noir, the only noir. Film Noir. Okay, I know. Tiffany glass. I broke the other one. Thrift store find. Anyways, so yeah, thank you for watching Film Studio Taku. I know this is a little bit bumpy, as most of my videos tend to be lately. I just have so much going on in my life, and getting these videos out is sometimes a challenge, but I do appreciate if you stayed to the very end. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you for your support, and I will see you in the next one. There is more coming soon. Peace.